Okay, so welcome everybody to our Surviving and Thriving lecture series, which is hosted every month. And this month we are joined by Jessica Krakowsky.
Hello.
We'll be talking about PTSD through cancer and beyond. So today we have Jessica coming to us from Genesis Therapy Care. Do you think you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, Jessica?
Hi, yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Jessica Krakowsky, and I am LCPC. I'm also a trauma professional, so I'm certified, and I work with a lot of individuals who deal with anxiety, depression, sometimes PTSD, some trauma. And so I've been in the field since 2009 doing this work. And I've really enjoyed helping people through some of the more challenging diagnoses, I think. It can be really hard to feel like yourself when you have to deal with and contend with serious mental health issues that can kind of take over. And so just really happy to be here to talk about these things and figure out if there's, maybe some questions at the end that you have. If you want to ask some questions that are personal, you're more than welcome to do that. I'm happy to answer questions that you have towards the ends of the presentation. Thank you for having me. So I was told that you guys were looking for a little more information for individuals. Gilda's Club is all about helping inform people who have cancer diagnoses, people who are surviving this illness. And I thought that that was really very important to provide these resources, because I also have family members who have dealt with that, and some survived and, some were not able to do that. And so it's definitely something that can bring up so many very serious feelings, emotions, and issues as you're trying to figure out what's what. So PTSD through cancer and beyond is all about that. I thought I'd start out with just sharing some information here about the statistics. Cancer does not affect the body alone. As I was saying, it impacts mind and mental health. 1/3 of people treated for cancer in the hospital have a mental health condition. It's a lot of people. The rates of major depressive disorder is 3 times higher in this group than in the rest of the general population. So when people have a diagnosis like this, it creates a huge shift in thinking. And it's oftentimes people are not sure how they're meant to cope with that, because they're facing sometimes life and death and figuring out, like, what do I need to do to survive here? So it might not be something that is on their radar, like, okay, I'm also suffering from depression or anxiety or loneliness or even suicidal ideation. 1 in 5 cancer survivors live with post-traumatic stress disorder. So being diagnosed with cancer and going through intensive treatment is stressful. Common issues that can come up. Changes in frequency of doctor's visits. So as you find that you get to a place where you're told you might be in remission, or you have to just wait and see, you've done your treatment and maybe you've come out the other side. Having less contact with doctors can be anxiety producing, because you're not in touch with the people with the information. They're not checking in as often on you. And I think that's something that, fear of reoccurrences can definitely be a big issue as well. Hoping that everything is okay, but not having any assurances. I think it's hard to sit with that. COVID-19 has also been a significant added burden for patients with cancer. And everything that we've gone through, I think people feel like we're on the other side of that, but no, it's still with us and it's impacting us in different ways. But having gone through, if you had cancer and you were dealing with COVID-19, that was a huge barrier to treatment sometimes. There's this thing called scanxiety, the stress and anxiety that cancer patients feel when waiting for scans and the results of those scans. Research shows that anxiety and distress are more common in long-term cancer survivors than in their healthy peers with no history of cancer. In addition to the fear of recurrence, the other sources of cancer-related distress for survivors include concerns about family, finances, changes in body image and sexuality, and the challenges of managing their long-term health needs. These cancer-specific types of distress may not fall into the classic description of anxiety or depression, but are still disruptive to a person's quality of life. So when I talk about PTSD, I just want to be clear. PTSD and trauma are different. Trauma, you can have trauma and not have PTSD. You can have experienced traumatic things and not end up being diagnosed with PTSD. PTSD is a very specific set of symptoms, and it is long-term significant distress, and it can even worsen with time. So there's a lot of information here. I just want to give you like the basics here. Trauma really, someone that feels like they're in danger, has a serious threat to their life. You can even witness someone else in danger and end up feeling traumatized from that, being a witness to something violent, or something there where you feel like there's a loss of control. So I think with cancer, it's not like these typical examples you see, right? Parental loss in childhood, auto accidents, physical violence, sexual assault, military combat experiences, and the unexpected loss of a loved one are commonly traumatic events. But so too is being faced with your own mortality and your fear that, you know, this illness that you have, you don't know if you're going to make it through the treatment and on the other side. So living with that kind of fear that is traumatizing and sometimes can lead to PTSD. The sufferers of long-term trauma may develop emotional disturbances like anxiety, anger, sadness, survivor's guilt, dissociation, and the inability to feel pleasure, or PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. So some of the symptoms that come with that include flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. I have a little graph here, a little diagram for you. So some of the diagnostic criteria for that, your stressor, and then the different ways that you can experience finding that it's hard to cope, it's hard to manage your feelings, you pull away from people, maybe isolate. So one of these symptoms is intrusion. Intrusive thoughts, such as repeated involuntary memories, distressing dreams, or flashbacks of the event. Flashbacks may be so vivid that people feel like they're reliving the event or seeing it before their eyes. So if this is happening, sometimes the person may not even seem like they're in the room with you anymore. Or you may notice that this is happening to you. If that's happening to you, it'll feel like the traumatic experience, and maybe this is the day that you got your diagnosis, or maybe this is the fear of a reoccurrence, that you may not make it, fears about your family not being able to handle it financially, whatever burdens you're taking on. You can feel like you're reliving those experiences, and you don't really have a lot of control over it popping into your head. Another symptom is avoidance, avoiding reminders of the traumatic event. That can include avoiding people, places, activities, objects, situations that can trigger those memories. People may try to avoid remembering or thinking about the event. They may resist talking about what happened or how they feel about it. Another symptom, alterations in cognition and mood. This is the inability to remember important aspects of the event. Negative thoughts and feelings leading to ongoing and distorted beliefs about oneself or others. Distorted thoughts about the cause or consequences of the event, leading to wrongly blaming self or other people. There's ongoing fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. Much less interest in activities previously enjoyed. Feeling detached or estranged from others, or being unable to experience positive emotions at all. So like a void of happiness or satisfaction. And then there's alterations in arousal and reactivity. So that may include being irritable and having angry outbursts, behaving recklessly or in a self-destructive way, being overly watchful of one's surroundings in a suspecting way, or being like easily startled, having problems concentrating or sleeping. And I know this can get tricky because if you're dealing with cancer symptoms or diagnosis, you may be having some of these problems just because of, the treatment or what you're going through with the cancer, right? Having trouble sleeping, having trouble concentrating. I mean, so it is difficult sometimes. There's a bit of overlap. So I think it's really key, like not self-diagnosing, but if a lot of these things are ringing true, it's just keep this in the back of your mind. It's like, maybe this is something I want to clarify for myself with a mental health professional, right? So symptoms, let's see here. We have symptoms of PTSD. So many people who are exposed to a traumatic event experience symptoms similar to those described above in the days following the event. The symptoms can cause significant distress or problems in daily functioning. So like not being able to function well in these specific ways. And each one of them has to be there for this to be an issue. But that's for PTSD. That's not to say that there isn't anxiety or depression happening, right? But specifically PTSD requires these symptoms to be met in these different groups. And they have to last longer than a month and persist. Sometimes they persist for months or years. PTSD occurs with other related conditions like depression, substance use, memory problems, and other physical and mental health problems. So sometimes people do try to self-medicate because of how much anxiety there is, or because they don't like these memories intruding and popping into their heads, like they may want to self-medicate. And that really gets tricky because if you're already on meds and you have access to meds like that, I mean, it becomes problematic. So, treatment and effective coping skills. So the disorders that could benefit from CBT. CBT is one of the main types of therapies that can help with PTSD, but it also is a great way to help anxiety, depression, even addiction. Other approaches, mindfulness-based stress reduction can be useful. That's often finding ways to ground yourself in your body. And that's through like somatic techniques, like that's your deep diaphragmatic breathing and yoga, and finding ways to not allow your mind to go where it wants to go. And that's to the negative thoughts, the fearful thoughts, to the past or the future, right? It's very present focused. And then there's self-management, exercise, and sometimes people do need medication for the anxiety or depression, and that's okay. That doesn't mean um, that you failed in some way, or that, that's, you're less of a person. Sometimes people need a little help, and it's good to discuss ways to get back to a baseline so that as you're trying to fight a diagnosis like this, you're not also trying to contend with a serious mental illness developing as well. So treatment and effective coping skills, we have storytelling can really be a very strong way for people to connect. Um, they found it helps survivors and caregivers cope with distress. So it talks about how they've studied this, and they found that people feel more connected when they're sharing their stories in groups of people. And this is also why, if you have cancer and you're having a hard time coping, you might find doctors are encouraging you to be a part of like groups of people who have cancer and who also are dealing with this diagnosis and the ways that it's interfering with their lives, or they're trying to overcome like these barriers, like feeling anxious, depressed, finding it hard to feel hopeful about the future. Just talking about it and sharing your story and hearing other people tell their stories can be a very powerful way of connecting and regaining some kind of hope and support. Acceptance and commitment therapy for fear of recurrence. So ACT supports survivors in figuring out what they can change by taking specific actions consistent with their values, yet recognizing the part of their experience they can't change, right? There are some things we can change and there's some things we can't. But if we spend too much time focusing on those things that we can't change, you can really end up in a spiral where all you do is focus on the hopelessness of it, where there are always things that we have control over within ourselves, such as, how we want to see the situation. So the quality of our thoughts, how we want to manage our feelings, not stuffing feelings, not ignoring feelings, acting as if everything's all right. Allowing ourselves to be angry when we need to be angry, but in healthy ways, right? If we feel sad, we can cry. If we feel sorry for the situation we're in, we can experience that. And it's good to do that with someone you feel is a safe person, right? This would be someone who's a friend or family member, or if you end up working with a therapist or a doctor and you feel close and can share those things, it's when you feel like your feelings aren't dismissed and someone isn't trying to fix you all the time, right? Your feelings are allowed, you're heard, and you can sit with that. So this is another powerful way to deal with cancer diagnosis or anxiety, depression, even without that. Don't let the past own you. You keep believing that you should be ashamed, that trauma was your fault, or that something bad really is just about to happen. And this results in a vicious cycle of shame, fear, more pain. It sends a message saying, watch out, it really is hopeless. And your body responds by going into fight, flight, freeze, or submit mode. Triggering is your body's way of being overprotective. So when you're triggered, it is no one's fault. You don't have control over your triggers. All you can do is choose how to respond to them. And I know in the field, this is very true. And this is something that I think people don't understand. The amygdala is the part of the brain that, has the fight flight reaction. And it is built into all of us. And it is a survival tool. It's prepares us to handle something that the brain feels like this is a danger and we need to do something about this. So once people are triggered, they really don't have a choice in the matter. It's going to just happen. So when people get upset that they're triggered or that they're feeling, like they don't have control over what their body is doing. So like if you're triggered, let's say, and you're in crisis mode, what that might feel like is your heart racing. Maybe you feel hot in the face. Maybe you'll feel like your hands have gone cold. You might feel dizzy. And what that is, though, is your body preparing you to fight or run away. And it's a very powerful defense mechanism. This is something that is a survival tool, and we don't get to choose whether it happens or not, you know, but you can choose what to do once you are triggered. And a lot of the times, those mindfulness techniques, the somatic techniques I talked about, having really good breathing techniques, ones that you've been practicing when you're not triggered, can be a really wonderful aid in calming your body and inducing the relaxation response. But it has to be something that you're preparing for when you're not in crisis. So you have to be practicing these things, doing deep breathing regularly, engaging in mindfulness techniques daily. And that could be something that can be a very powerful tool in turning this around faster. So you can't necessarily help being triggered, but you do have a way to calm yourself faster. Like this, recovery is all about balance. So overcoming trauma and neglect requires learning to balance rest and activity, distance and closeness, thinking and feeling, and exposure and avoidance. For example, avoiding too many triggers will constrict your normal healthy life, while exposing yourself to unnecessary triggers will overactivate your trauma responses. So if people say they know what triggers them and they're just going to avoid, that might get in the way of their relationships with some people. Like if they're triggered by, that hospital by their uncle's house or something, and so they're not going to go to their uncle's, that's not good for that relationship, right? So you want to make sure that you aren't allowing your triggers to dictate how you live your life. But nor do you want to trigger yourself unnecessarily. So if you don't need to be somewhere for a reason like your relationships or, work or something that means something to you, then you do want to make sure that you face, and calm yourself with those triggers, right? So that's learning calming techniques, that's preparing yourself and identifying, knowing yourself, knowing what those triggers are and being mindful of that. But be careful of too much avoidance. You are here now, not there. So triggering confuses where you are in time and place. The timing mechanisms in your brain get thrown off. So during a flashback, the past doesn't feel like the past, and the traumatic experience does not feel over and done with. So dissociation can happen. And that's where your mind might take you somewhere else. You may not be in the room. You may be in the flashback in the moment. So when you are in it, you actually feel as if the event is happening. Whatever it is that is traumatized is happening in that moment. And you have a sense of not feeling in control of it playing out. But there are also things you can learn to do in therapy and in treatment to help you to manage that and to learn how to ground yourself. So that you don't feel like it just takes over and steals time from you. So another guide to what you experience, you need to use your thinking skills to know if you're safe or in danger in the present. Like asking yourself, are you at risk for being attacked right now? Are you truly alone and without any support? Or does it just feel that way? So if you can think your way through these moments, a piece of that is, reality testing as best you can. But sometimes that may not be possible because of how triggered you are. And so then it's really just using your somatic techniques to try to feel like you can induce a relaxation response to get through it. Research and limitations in the field. So numerous approaches have been shown to help cancer patients and survivors cope with cancer-related anxiety and distress. However, many studies of these methods have been done in large cancer centers. And one challenge that remains is how to implement existing approaches in real-world settings, such as community oncology or primary care practices. So that's one of the things that is still being worked on, and finding ways to provide more resources and supports to people who are maybe getting treatment in their communities and smaller areas or rural areas. Another limitation, many studies of approaches to help survivors cope with anxiety and distress, as well as depression, have focused only on women breast cancer survivors. So it's limited, figuring out what's going to be effective and for who. There have not been a broad range of studies done. They have to do more. Studies supported by NCI and others, however, are exploring new ways to support the psychological and emotional health needs of a diverse range of cancer survivors, and how to tailor existing approaches to meet the needs of specific individuals or groups. So like in my field, I know like we have certain ways of helping people with different sets of symptoms, but you're all individuals with your own individual experiences. And so some things are going to be more triggering to you than others. You can have people witnessing the same traumatic experience. Some people will be traumatized and some people won't, right? It doesn't make one person stronger than another. It's just differences in how people process these experiences. And it's the same with your diagnosis, the same with how you're impacted, the same with how your families are impacted. Learning how to, deal with that. It's very different. And it does require individualized treatment and focus, because you're individual people and very different. One set of strategies to help in one way for one person may not work the same in another. So it's good to have a variety of approaches, and to have someone who is trained in the field and someone who you really you click with. Because there are lots of people who can be trained in the field, but you have different personalities and different strategies and approaches. And so if you go to one person and you find like, oh, I don't really think we clicked, I didn't really like their style, I didn't like their bedside manner, whatever, I didn't like their approach, it's okay to say, this isn't going to work for me, but don't give up on, finding someone else to work with you, because it varies so much. There are so many different people who are able to help in this way, provide support. The silver lining, surviving cancer can lead to positive changes in a person's life. Definitely. I've seen this personally. 9 Ways to Recover Your Mental Health talks about ways to get healthy, exercising more, prioritizing rest and diet, making social connections, living more in the moment, feeling like you're given a second chance, feeling like it's given more meaning to things. Sometimes people come out and notice like these changes in their mindset and their views on life. So cancer experience may help survivors develop new strategies to manage emotional challenges, deepen their relationships with family or friends, help them realize that they have the strength to get through difficult situations. So surviving cancer can also lead people to reevaluate their priorities and appreciate life more fully. 100%. I know sometimes this even leads to those long conversations that need to be had with family and friends that people put off just because they take for granted that they have time, and it's important that we tell our loved ones what they mean to us today, right? Because we really don't know how much time we have, any of us, with or without a diagnosis. So some references here. If you guys want that, I can definitely give that to you later too. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to hearing